Hi, everyone, and welcome to Education 438, teaching reading and writing in the content area. I am here with a day 11 overview for you. It is the beginning of week 3, and this video is going to be pretty short. It's just going to be straight and sweet and to the point. We're going to talk about major takeaways from last week, as well as some objectives and some essential questions for you to consider as you dive into today's reading. So, what does this video cover? Like I said, I'm going to go over the major topics we looked at last week, as well as some big ideas that I pulled from the readings and resources. Then we're going to jump into our topics for today, our objectives for today, and some essential questions to consider while you do today's reading. And these essential questions will relate to your attendance participation grade for today. So, let's go ahead and jump right in. Okay, so in this past week, we've spent some time learning about the following, helping students understand and remember word meanings. So last week was really focused on meaningful and effective vocabulary instruction and what that looks like across the disciplines. We also read and discussed specific activities for building vocabulary comprehension and ownership in the secondary classroom. And a lot of you in your reflections really talked about the difference between memorization and true ownership of discipline-specific and even Tier 2 vocabulary as well. Selecting and building vocabulary activities around Tier 2 and Tier 3 words. And this is something that you also worked on for Stage 2 of your unit plan. And then my favorite topic, which was multimodal learning and the importance of multimodal instruction in the secondary classroom. So here are the big takeaways for me. I asked you all to do a reflection last week that focused on synthesis. So here's mine. Some big takeaways. Being mindful of how we choose vocabulary words to focus on with students, as well as how we teach these words. So really engaging with Tier 2 and Tier 3 vocabulary instruction for me has really forced me to think about how I choose words. So not just picking at random words from whatever text we're reading, but really being conscientious about what I'm choosing to focus on with students. And beyond that, really being conscientious about the strategies and activities I choose to teach these words. My two big takeaways with multimodal instruction. Multimodal instruction helps all learners while speaking to individual learning styles. So this is a win-win situation for everyone, right? When you incorporate different modes of content building, of asking students to demonstrate mastery, we're speaking to individual learning styles, but we're also helping all of the learners in our classroom at any given time. And then something else I've been thinking about a lot is that meaningful multimodal instruction is key. So this is not just using tech for technology's sake or throwing digital tools or multimedia at our students just to do so, but to really think about being thoughtful and conscientious about the types of multimodalities we're bringing into the classroom and thinking about how those support our lessons, our objectives, our goals for our students, etc. So this week we are moving into a new topic. So we've spent time talking about academic language development. We've talked about small and whole group discussion tactics. We've talked about inquiry in the classroom. We've talked about multimodality. And this week we're moving into talking about close reading and how close reading really relates to the Common Core State Standards. So this is the textbook that I am pulling our PDFs from for the early readings for this week. It's called A Close Look at Close Reading. And in my attempt to save you all money, I'm pretty sure I've made a lot of really illegal PDFs for you from this book, but so it goes. So close reading. We're going to be thinking about close reading as an instructional strategy, kind of like we did with vocabulary. We're going to be thinking about close reading and how it relates to the Common Core State Standards. We're going to be thinking about text complexity. So how do we evaluate text complexity? How do we understand how to incorporate complex texts into our classrooms? What are teacher and reader roles in the close reading process? And then our objectives are really very much related to that, okay? So I'm going to ask you to familiarize yourself with close reading as an instructional strategy through reading about the Common Core State Standards in relation to reading standards, text complexity, and our roles as teachers versus the roles of the reader in the close reading process. I'm also going to ask you to think about how close reading differs from other types of reading instruction. And we're going to do that through close reading about close reading, which is very meta. I'm going to ask you to look at a concrete example of a close reading strategy. So, a lot of schools around town use Avid as an instructional toolbox, basically, for teaching literacy skills. And so, I have shared an Avid strategy with you all today. It's called marking the text. And I want you to think about how that approach can lead to deeper text comprehension. And then here are the questions that I want you to focus on today. Now, part of what I want you to think about as I'm going through these questions is which one is most interesting to you, because your attendance participation grade today is going to stem from choosing one of these essential questions to explore in 2 to 3 sentences in a response. So, why is it important to understand reading comprehension as multifaceted and as rooted in context, okay, what you're teaching in your class, what your discipline is, and also in the individual learner? How can we understand the Common Core State standards, the reading standards in particular, as a set of guidelines as opposed to a scripted curriculum? Maybe it is the Luddite in me, maybe it is the creative in me, but I am very wary of scripted curriculum. And I have seen sometimes that people take the Common Core State standards as scripted curriculum when really they're just a set of guidelines, okay? So how can we understand these standards that we have to work with as guidelines as opposed to something that we have to use to completely shape and create our curriculum? How do we select complex texts for students to grapple with? What does that mean to you, and what does that mean in your discipline? What are some measures we can use to determine the complexity of a text? And it's okay if you disagree with the measures of complexity that are sort of put forward by our authors here, okay? But I still want you to think about this. How do we measure complexity? What does that look like in your discipline? What is close reading? What is the purpose of close reading, and how does it differ from other types of classroom reading instruction? How does close reading benefit students in disciplines outside of English language arts? We've been talking about this since day one, but literacy instruction is the responsibility of all students. I mean, and all teachers, right? So, what does this look like? In a class that isn't English. So I think once you read these chapters, you'll have a better understanding of how to maybe respond to this question. But how do we do close reading in physical education? How do we do close reading in visual arts? What does it look like? How is it different than just close reading done in a language arts classroom? What is the role of the reader in the close reading process? What is the role of the teacher? This is huge. Are there limitations or drawbacks to an overfocus on close reading? I've been thinking about this a lot. I read an article a couple weeks ago that was basically a critique of close reading, and it was basically criticizing close reading for destroying students' desire to read. So I do think that there are limitations. I think there are drawbacks to only focusing on this type of reading in the classroom. So that's something I want you to think about today as you're reading these first few chapters of this text is, okay, what happens if we only focus on this? What are the drawbacks? What are the limits for our students? So as I mentioned, your attendance participation grade for today comes from choosing one of these essential questions to wrestle with and to just responding in a couple of sentences with your name as a comment on this video. You can also email it as well. These are pretty loaded questions, and I get that it's kind of hard to wrestle with them in limited space, but think of it as a start, right, to how you're thinking about these questions and how you're thinking about close reading, because it is our major topic, at least for today and tomorrow. All right, some reminders. We do have a required Zoom meeting tomorrow from 4:30 to 5:30, and your only homework for today is your attendance participation grade, which I just explained. So pretty straightforward for today. The readings seem like a lot, but I promise they go pretty quickly. We are dense on the readings for today and tomorrow, and then they lighten up a little bit later this week. I hope everyone is having a great day. I hope you are looking forward to reading about reading, and I'm looking forward to seeing everyone tomorrow, of course, on our required Zoom.